All right, so let's look at the nonsense that they purvey on this EVA, this extravehicular activity. In other words, this hike that they're going to take from the lunar module to the rim of Cone Crater. All right? And in this depiction here, this illustration here, what's most interesting is that they show the incline of the climb. All right? By the way, this is the EVA laid over the Washington Mall. Okay, there's the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Memorial, and the White House is, and this is Cone Crater here, and the White House is above Cone Crater there. But anyway, so that gives you the scale. But what's more interesting is they show the actual incline to scale. All right, how gradual it is. All right, see that gradual incline to the rim of Cone Crater? All right, there it is again in two parts. They're only going to go up 90 meters. But look what they say here. During the early stages of the climb, they made good time. Before long, the grade was getting quite steep, about a 10% slope, and they were both breathing hard enough to hear back in Houston. The march only lasted for a minute or so before Shepard had to call for a halt. His heart rate was getting up to 140 beats a minute, and he needed a rest. What on earth could they be talking about? They are going only up to 90 meters over a distance of 1,400 meters, almost a mile. They're going to take almost a mile to go up only 90 meters in 1/6 Earth gravity. They should be hopping along without any trouble whatsoever. And yet they're talking about getting tired. So much so, all right, that the two astronauts were not able to find the rim amid the rolling terrain of the crater slopes. They were intending to reach the rim. That's what they went there for, okay, to find Cone Crater. They became physically exhausted from the attempt, and with their suits' oxygen supplies starting to run low, the effort was called off. What nonsense! And I'll show you in more detail how nonsensical all of this is. This is a 100-meter tall building. And I found this on the internet because I looked up 100-meter building and it showed me the tallest building in Central America. That's what this is, in El Salvador. All right, so they went up to 90 meters in climb. This is the Sears Tower, 450 meters tall, 5 times the height of their climb, these astronauts' alleged climb. People race up to the top of Sears Tower, up the stairs, every year. It's a regular thing, all right, in 100% Earth gravity. These are 10,000 foot peaks, which is about 3,000 meters in New Mexico. I have climbed mountains just like this in New Mexico, and I'm not an expert climber, but I had little trouble. In fact, I had no trouble. It was a little bit tiring, but it was no problem. And that's 3,000 meters, not 90 meters. And yet the astronauts did this slight climb, all right, this baby climb, in 1/6 Earth gravity, and they're supposed to have gotten tired. It's absolutely nonsensical. All right, this is a ridge on Earth, all right, and it's in an arc, similar to the one on the moon near Apollo 14. So let's say you landed, you parachuted, let's say, down to here, or drove, whatever. If you end up about here, you're going to see that ridge. And if you take photographs in that direction, you're going to photograph that ridge. No question about it, right? Just like this person here photographed this woman and the ridge, this ridge here. And here's another ridge. You're not going to miss a prominent ridge in photographs. These are hills on Earth. We have to ground ourselves on Earth reality before we look at the silliness of Apollo. All right, these are hills on Earth, and if you find yourself in these hills, you're going to see them, and you're going to be able to photograph them. No question whatsoever, right? Now let's look at Meteor Crater again, okay? Because they're looking for a crater, Cone Crater, on the moon. So here are the relative sizes of Meteor Crater and Cone Crater. Cone Crater is a little less than a third of the diameter of Meteor Crater, but it's twice the height. Okay, so it still would be a prominent crater. It's not as large as Meteor Crater, but it would still be a prominent crater. This is a Meteor Crater from 3 miles away. Cone Crater would be about this size, okay, that's about a third, about this width, but it would be twice as high, okay, so it would be something like this. and they would be quite prominent. You cannot miss a meteor crater. If you were told to walk to meteor crater and look into the rim, you would not miss it from here. Okay, and similarly, you would not miss cone crater either. This is from closer up. This looks like it could be a group of people. This is the center, the visitor center near the rim. But anyway, so if you were told to walk to meteor crater from here, there is no way in the world that you would miss it. You would have to be falling down drunk or impaired to not be able to find meteor crater from here. And here are tourists hiking up to the rim, and this includes this older woman here and this young girl. So it's no problem at all to hike up to the rim of meteor crater. And here's a group of people going around the rim, which I have done, by the way. I've visited meteor crater and hiked around the rim. Now imagine that you were right here, okay, which is about 20 meters away from the rim. So let's say you were somewhere around here. That's how close the Apollo 14 astronauts were supposed to have gotten to the rim of Cone Crater, and yet they could not find it. They couldn't walk that extra 20 meters and find the rim of Cone Crater and look inside Cone Crater. It is completely ridiculous. You walk around Meteor Crater and you see the inside of Meteor Crater. Now let's look at the photographs that the astronauts took of their surroundings at the landing site and as they climbed to Cone Crater. But first, let's reorient ourselves. This is the landing site, and this is the ridge that we're talking about, and Cone Crater would be somewhere in there. How convenient that they covered it up with this arrow. That would have been one of the best photographs of the general area. And here's this photograph again to remind us that the landing site is about there. They're going to do this hike to the Cone Crater, which would be somewhere near this ridge, okay? And there are hills all around, all right? And here's the first photograph we see of the landscape around the landing site. This is half the horizon, and they're taking this photograph from 20 feet up in the lunar module. It's flat. It's completely flat. How could that possibly be? It could not. It would not be flat if they were really on the moon, where they said they were. You would see that ridge or hills or both. This is half the horizon. This is a composite half panorama. This is a full panorama, and we're going to look at this thing in thirds, from left to right. You can see already it's flat. There is no ridge. There are no hills. What's going on is that they are not on the moon. They are not in the terrain that they claim that they are. All right, so here's this EVA again, and these are stations that they supposedly stopped at and did things at, like take photographs, examine the terrain and the rocks or whatever. You know, they did various things at these stations. So we're going to look first at station B2, which is halfway up. All right, that would be around here. And here they are, halfway up, halfway on the climb, and they're already close to 30 meters up. They would have a very good view of the surrounding terrain, right? They would see that ridge and they would see the hills. This is the panorama, full 360-degree panorama they took from station B2. There is no ridge and there are no hills, unless you count that slight mound as a hill. All you see is this gradual rise to the alleged rim of Cone Crater, which is not very realistic, but let's grant them that. So there's Cone Crater, but there are no hills or ridge, and there's no ridge in this 360-degree panorama. What we're dealing with here is clearly fiction. We've been in fiction territory since the beginning of this alleged Apollo mission. Here is the same image with NASA showing us with labels where the astronaut is and where he's going. How on earth are they going to miss the rim of that crater? You would not miss the crater. You would not fail to find Cone Crater. All right, now let's move on to the top of the climb, very near the rim of the crater. All right, right here. All right, that's station C. And this is the panorama, 360-degree panorama that they took from that location. And immediately we see some severe problems with this panorama. First of all, there's a cubic horizontal all the way across. How could that be? It couldn't, because they're not on a plateau. They're on the side of essentially a mountain, a mountain with a hole at the top, right? That's what a crater is. They're right here, all right? So in looking away from Cone Crater, they would see a gradual slope. They would not see any sharp line with a drop-off, with bifurcation of foreground and background. They would not see a cubic horizontal. They would see a gradual slope, like this. This is the slope that you see from the top of Meteor Crater. All right, no problem, you know, no issue here. You see a slope all the way down to the bottom. Same thing here, and if not for this parking lot, you would see it just as clearly. Secondly, you see the mountains in the background. There were hills all around Cone Crater, all around that landing site of Apollo 14. You would see those at the height that they were at 90 meters height, okay? But you don't. Oh yeah, let's look at that one more time, this panorama. Yeah, here you are. So you have that cubic horizontal, but no hills and no ridge anywhere to be seen. Okay. And they claimed that they were not able to find the rim amid the rolling terrain of the crater slopes, and elsewhere they blamed the boulders, okay? They claimed that there were too many boulders and large ones. This is what they're calling a boulder. First of all, this is not a sizable boulder, all right? Secondly, even if you had larger boulders than this, that's not going to impede you, that's not going to prevent you from finding the rim of the crater. All right, they would have to be a whole lot larger and a lot more numerous than that. But this is what they're calling a boulder field. This photograph is labeled among the Apollo photographs as a boulder field. Here's a footprint to give you the size, the scale, all right? These are little rocks. They're not boulders at all, much less boulders in the size and quantity, in a size and quantity that would prevent you from finding the rim of the crater. This image right here is from right here, okay, which is part of that panorama, this same panorama. All right, they're nearly at the rim. They just have to go a little bit further, and they're claiming that the rolling terrain and these boulders impeded them. There is no rolling terrain, and there are no boulders. It's relatively flat. They had no excuse whatsoever to not find the rim and to look into Cone Crater. And then looking back from Station C, there's the LEM in the distance. In that direction, you would see hills. This is all they see. Very slight mounds, no hills to speak of. Here they are, and they're looking back in that direction, okay, which is, here they are, and they're looking in this direction. Where are those hills? This is not a great distance. They would see hills just like we see mountains here from the top of Meteor Crater. This is what we get from Apollo 14. A flat terrain, no Cone Crater, no ridge, no hills, no landscape of craters and boulders to speak of. Pure nonsense. They don't show us anything because they are not on the moon. They are in a studio on a moon set. This is the alleged landing site of Apollo 15. It's at the northern end of the Apennine Mountains, the lunar version, of course. There are Apennine Mountains in Italy, which I didn't even know before I studied this. Okay, so this is the range, and this is the lunar equivalent of our Himalayas. These are the tallest mountains on the moon, but they're not nearly as long. The range is not nearly as long as the Himalayas on Earth. And this is a very nice photograph of them. And you can see here that they're very rugged, okay, craggy. There's nothing soft or smooth about these mountains. And the landing site is right here between these two mountains, Mons Hadley and Mons Hadley Delta. The range contains six of the 8 tallest mountains on the moon. This is Mons Hadley, and here's Mons Hadley Delta right here, the 2nd and 5th tallest. Those two right there. And the landing site, once again, is right here, very close to Mons Hadley Delta, and here is Mons Hadley, which is a double peak, by the way. And these mountains are actually the equivalent in height of Mount Everest. Okay, so they're very tall. And by height, I'm talking about prominence, which is different from height from sea level, which is an artificial, arbitrary measure, because it adds whatever height of the plateau that the mountain sits on. So prominence is a measure from the plateau, the level that the mountain is sitting on. Okay, in this particular illustration, it shows that Mount McKinley, Denali, is actually a taller mountain than Mount Everest. But of course, Mount Everest is still very tall. And Mons Hadley is a little taller, and Mons Hadley Delta is just a little less tall. All right, so here's the exact landing site. Here's Mons Hadley Delta, and here's Mons Hadley. And this is an EVA map, extravehicular activities. In other words, excursions. The last one we saw was from Apollo 14, and it was on foot. These are, and subsequent ones are all going to be driving in the lunar rover. Here they are driving around this region right here. I'm going to show you some mountains, and then we're going to look at the photographs of the mountains on the moon. This is Mount Everest, and it's towering over this valley, as you can see. Very impressive. This is Mount Rainier, soaring over Seattle in Washington State. This is Mount Fuji, towering over this city. I don't know what city this is. It's not Tokyo, because Mount Fuji is farther away from Tokyo than this. And this is Mount Shasta. Again, what better word, towering over this valley here. Okay? In each of these cases, these mountains are extremely impressive. Okay? And they dominate. That's another word, dominating the surrounding landscape. This is Mons Hadley. That is supposed to be a mountain taller than Mount Everest. It's not dominating the landscape. In fact, it's a featureless blob. It looks like a clay mold or a paper mache thing, or I don't know what they made this out of, but it's fake as hell, and it doesn't even look tall. This is Mons Hadley Delta, which is almost even more featureless, not dominating the landing site. This is the lunar module. Already we can see with fake mountains, cartoon mountains. Okay, now let's look at a specific case or specific illustration. This is Mount Rainier. This photograph was taken from the Space Needle in Seattle. So we know the exact distance between where the photographer is and what do you call it, Mount Rainier. Okay, and that distance is 60 miles. This distance we also know because this is at the landing site, and this is the shadow of the lunar module. Okay, this distance to this peak, Mons Hadley, is 17 miles. Now look at the difference between these two scenes. This mountain is not as tall as Mons Hadley, yet it looks way taller, and it's also almost four times the distance. It's almost 4 times this distance. Again, Mons Hadley is a little taller than Mount Rainier. Seattle to Mount Rainier is 60 miles. The Apollo 15 site to Mons Hadley Peak is 17 miles. Dominating the scene, not dominating the scene at about 1/4 the distance. It's just fake, is all you can say. Okay, another way to look at this, another way to determine the fakery, to establish the fakery, is to look at these photographs of the Himalayas from space. These are from orbit. This is Mount Everest. Okay. Now, when we get down to ground level, these mountains, of course, are going to be much more impressive, right? We're going to see them a lot more closely and with more detail, and they're going to be a lot more imposing. This is Mount Everest again, right here. Okay. You can already see, and they're kind of craggy, all right? And they're going to look even more craggy when we see them closer, right? And in fact, that's exactly what we see. Look how sharp these features are. This is Mount Everest. Another view from another angle. And these are more of the Himalaya mountains. Very, very impressive, as we would expect. Okay, so these are lunar orbiter photographs of Mons Hadley and Mons Hadley Delta. And of special interest is going to be these mountains in between the two, this arc of mountains. Mons Hadley is actually a double peak, as I've mentioned, and as is shown in this overlay here. Okay, it's a double peak. And in general, these mountains are quite complex and rugged. You can already see that literally from space. These are amateur photographs, and you can see how rough they are. Okay. Again. And again. The landing site is right about here. And this here is the panorama, or a panorama. They took a lot of panoramas, that is, collections of photographs. Okay, all these are individual photographs, mosaics of photographs. Anyway, this is a panorama of the entire scene near the landing site, because there's the LEM right there. Okay, this is Mount Hadley Delta, this is Mount Hadley, and these are those mountains in between that we're going to, look at a little bit closely. And you can already see that these things bear no resemblance to the actual photographs of them. They're rounded, they're smooth, they're featureless, they're bland, they're washed out. Okay? These are those mountains in between that I mentioned. They're just blah, and they don't look tall at all. We're going to go through the individual photographs of the panorama. There's Mount Hadley. There we go around to the mountains in between Mount Hadley and Mount Hadley Delta. What the heck are those things? Okay, this is what we're supposed to be seeing. This rugged stuff, okay, with craters and everything. That is supposed to be this. There is absolutely no resemblance. These look like mounds of, I don't know what, soft, rounded mounds with a blanket thrown over them. That's how soft they look. This is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with cartoon mountains, literally. Okay, except that these are even sharper than Apollo ones. We'd have to go to these, because these are nice and rounded, like this silliness here. This is what we're dealing with. Fake cartoon mountains. I don't know how what exactly materials they used. I don't know if they just painted them. I don't know if they made them out of clay. I don't know how they, made this fake stuff, but it's certainly fake. This here is a real car, obviously. It's a Honda Accord. It has the logo and everything, and it has a lot of sharp features and very specific features. It has detail and distinctive details. Okay, this is just a representation of a car. It's just a cartoon car. Okay, that's why it's so soft. Very few distinctive features. So real objects are distinctive. They're specific. They're feature-laden. They're sharp and well-defined, and they're oftentimes impressive. Fictitious objects are indefinite, generic, bland, relatively featureless. As few features as possible here. They're rounded and fuzzy, and they're unimpressive and unremarkable. That's what we're dealing with with the mountains that were being shown here in Apollo 15. Also, look at the ground itself. It's totally featureless, literally. Okay, where are the craters and boulders that should be ubiquitous on the moon? Look at this. This is literally flat. So flat that it looks like ice. It looks like an ice skating rink. It looks like the hardened snow on a flat surface on Earth. The crusty snow after it's melted and then hardened. Same thing here. Flat, featureless. Moving on to another feature that should have been extremely impressive. That's this rill here, which is like a canyon. This is Hadley Rill. Okay, and this is the whole thing. It started around here apparently. Okay, because it seems to have flown in this direction. Flown. What's the term? Flowed. Yeah, flowed. It flowed in this direction, because you can see it's wider here, and then it peters out over here. And what it was a flow of lava, which melted the surface of the moon, this valley floor. All right? So it's a canyon of sorts. It's the lunar equivalent of canyons, like these, which, of course, are made by water or rivers. So when they show us photographs of Hadley Rill close up, this is more or less the kind of thing we should be seeing. A vast thing, okay, with wide open spaces and long distances across and down and everywhere. If you've ever been to the Canyonlands in the American Southwest, you know what I'm talking about. It's extremely impressive, unforgettable, formidable. Here's another photograph of this sort of thing. And a good comparison is actually Meteor Crater. Meteor Crater is a round crater. It's not a long canyon, but there are good specifications that we can compare. For instance, Hadley Rill is about 1.4 kilometers wide, almost a mile wide. Meteor Crater is a little bit less wide. Hadley Rill, however, is 370 meters deep, twice as deep, more than twice as deep as Meteor Crater. Okay, so we get good comparisons with Meteor Crater. There's Meteor Crater. Imagine now a canyon wider than this. This thing is so wide you can't even fit it in one photograph, and twice as deep, but continuing on, going on, you know, for miles. All right, that's what Hadley Rill is like in reality. Now, let's keep in mind something very important, which is that from the perspective of the astronauts who landed right here and only drove around and explored this small area right here, from their perspective, Hadley Rill is straight. Okay, it's literally straight for a couple miles and almost straight for 4.5 miles. This is a good alleged photograph. I'm going to show you how, you know, all these photographs of the landing site are fake, but for now let's just go with it. So this is the 2 miles of completely straight rill, and up to here is 4.5 miles of almost straight rill with just one slight bend. All right, there it is in writing. And so here are their EVAs. They were confined to a straight portion of the rill. Simple as that. That's going to be important as we go along here. All right, so here's another amateur photograph of the landing site, which is right about here. And here's another one, another photograph with the sun at a different angle. And you can see from these photographs how straight that section of Hadley Rill is. So here are their EVAs. They had 3 of them altogether, 1, 2, 3. And we're going to start with this one here, and we're going to look at their views from Station 2. Okay, they had stations along the way within the EVAs. And here it is right here, Station 2. And I used 2 sets of EVAs because this one shows the actual EVAs very well, but the landing site is, the terrain is funky, even faker than usual. Whereas this map has a more reasonable terrain, more realistic terrain, but you can't see the EVAs too closely. So that's why I use 2 sets. But anyway, so this is Station 2 right here, and they should be looking right into this canyon and get a wonderful view of a long canyon going, you know, for 4.5 miles. It would be huge, wide and long. This is what they show us. This is a panorama, a mosaic of a number of photographs, but essentially this is the only photograph they show us of the entire canyon all the way to the bottom, okay? Which in itself is very peculiar because they're going to have a lot more opportunities to show us the canyon, but they won't. They will fail to do so. So this is the one photograph, and we can see that it's fake, okay? No way on earth is this a mile wide, okay, and 4.5 miles long. You can see the rocks at the bottom, what would be miles away. Okay, this would be literally miles away, even as far as 4.5 miles. You can see individual rocks. Okay, this is some couple miles away, and this canyon, or rather this rill, is almost 1/4 mile deep. How on earth would you be seeing individual rocks? And you know, this lunar rover shows us the scale. There's just no way that this is correct. And also it's too windy. It's so windy, as a matter of fact, that I was confused with a lot of these features in Apollo 15. I had to study them over a period of time to get my bearings because all the proportions, all the sizes, all the relations, spatial relations are wrong, simply wrong. So you have to translate fiction into some realistic thing. Otherwise, you wouldn't make heads or tails out of anything. But anyway, this is too windy, all right? Certainly, we're not seeing something realistic like this. vast spaces. Nothing of the sort. We're not seeing anything remotely like these huge spaces of real canyons and real craters in this case. Okay? Remember, this rill is twice as deep as this and even wider. This is not of that same size, roughly. It's not even remotely that kind of size. And they play on this notion of a winding, sinuous rill. It's a stereotype, all right? The rill is windy, but over its 40-mile length. This is about 40 miles here. Yeah, sure, it's windy over 40 miles, but again, not where the astronauts were. Not in that small space. Okay, in this small area, as I said several times, because it's critical for our understanding of how fake everything is here, in this perspective, no, the rill is not windy. So this is just fake. Okay, let's move on to the view from Station 9A. Now this is right on the edge of this humongous rill, right here. What kind of views, are they going to show us here? We're expecting some stupendous views. They're right on the edge. They're going to show us this huge rill in all its glory, all the way to the bottom, photograph it up, they're going to photograph it down, they're going to photograph it across, right? This is just going to be stupendous. This is what they show us. What the heck is this? And this is all they show us. This is the one panorama that they show us. Why could the astronaut not have gone to the edge and shown us the whole thing from the bottom up? They act as if there's a force field. And this isn't the only time we're going to see this. We're going to see this also with craters in subsequent missions. They act like there's a force field preventing them from showing these things in all their glory. And why is that? Because they can't show us what they're not seeing, what they don't have in front of them. They do not have a huge rill in front of them. This is a little ditch. Okay, so here are the individual photographs of that panorama. You can see the individual rocks on the other side, a mile across, a mile away. All right? And you never see the thing to the bottom from this angle. Okay, it's imaginable that photographing straight across the rill, you would not see the bottom. Okay? But at this angle, you would start to see the bottom. Why wouldn't you? Okay? Just think of it from this angle. But anyway, clearly these rocks are too well seen. They're just a little smaller than the rocks on this side. That's what they're showing us. That's what they're trying to pass off as a gigantic rill, like the size of the Grand Canyon. Again, nothing like this, which it should be. We already saw, we saw the actual figures of the dimensions. It should be something like this, but it's not. All right, moving on to Station 6A, right here. Now, my goodness, this is from a couple hundred meters up on the slope of Mount Hadley Delta, all right? Magically, they were able to drive up on the side of the mountain, which you can't do even on Earth, without roads. But anyway, they did it, allegedly. And now they're going to be looking down right into the heart of this rill, right down the throat, right down the barrel of the gun, so to speak. Okay? It's going to be a bird's eye view, right? This is what they show us. Another panorama. And this is ludicrous. What the hell is this? They don't show us what would be seen if they were right here and shooting right across in there. What is this? All right, they show us the rill going across, going perpendicular to the line of sight. How could that be? There's nothing perpendicular to the line of sight from here through to here. It's straight down the length of the rill. What could this be? Crossing the line of sight. Another thing that's completely wrong in this photograph, in this mosaic, is this hill here, or this mountain, which is Hill 305. That's what the astronauts called it, Hill 305, or NASA, whatever. Okay, that's Hill 305. This is the rill. Okay, nothing is right here. So here they are at Station 6A, about right here. And they should be looking straight down into the rill, and then on the other side, in the distance, would be this Hill 305, with the high part of it, the tallest part of it, right across the rill, in the same line of sight as the rill, and it would be on the northern end. This tall part, the highest part of this hill, quote-unquote Hill 305, would be at the northern end. But that's not what is shown. What is shown is the highest part at the southern end. And here's this panorama which shows the whole valley. Okay, this is Hill 305, this is Mons Hadley, and this is Mons Hadley Delta over here. So you can see here that from that panorama, and here they are at Station 6A, okay, that you have that little, what do you call it, gap right there, all right, more or less in between Hill 305 and Mons Hadley, all right, and then you have this slight rise here, right there. Okay, so this gives us the perspective, the relations between all these features. So Hill 305 should have that high part right here at the northern end, not the southern end. And that's confirmed by all these other photographs of Hill 305. That's the high end, the northern end, the taller end right there, clearly. All right. This is sloping down. There it is, okay, the tall end. So looking across, you would look right into the rill, and on the other side, and it would be lengthwise, right down the length of it, 4.5 miles, and on the other side would be the tall part, this tall side end, however you want to put it, of Hill 305. Okay, that's not what we see here. We see nothing of the sort here. This is all messed up. It's just simply wrong. Somebody drew it wrong. Illustration which is done wrong. This professor, physicist, studied the photographs of Hadley Rill from Apollo 15 with this method of stereoscopic parallax, which is essentially simple. It's the difference between the view in the foreground and background when you shift your position when you're photographing things, like so, okay? You shift over a few feet to 5-10 feet or whatever, and the foreground shifts, but the background doesn't, because of perspective, because of the distance, whatever, however you want, you know. And so he used this method, this fact, to learn what the actual distances were that we're seeing in Apollo, in the photographs of Apollo 15, specifically with regard to Hadley Rill. And he did this in detail, and his specialized knowledge, which I didn't follow in all its detail. At a minimum, I would have to study it a lot closer, and I'm not a trained physicist. But anyway, he determined that the distance across the rill is only 40 meters. And the distance to that bend, that major bend that is supposed to be 4.5 miles,
in the photograph it's actually only 140 meters, a little beyond this 90-meter label. As he says, the distance to the Rima-Hadley bow does not exceed 140 meters.
And he concluded that what we're looking at in the photographs of Apollo 15 is nothing more or less than an artificial trench 30 to 60 meters wide. That's what this is. Now you can see that that's exactly what this is. It's a trench dug in the desert somewhere. Maybe they found something that was already partly filled the bill, I don't know. And it's just a few tens of meters wide and tens of meters long. This is no way a huge rill canyon-like thing. All right, let's continue with this panorama, which is very useful. We're done with Hadley Rill, another fake thing. Apollo 15 alone contains enough fakery to completely uncover, dismantle the Apollo missions. It's replete with fakery. But anyway, let's continue. Now the second fake thing in this panorama is this thing right here. Here's a close-up, this thing right here. What is that? Okay, you would think, just looking at this without any other knowledge, you would say, well, that's a distant peak, right? That's another mountain in the distance. Well, in fact, that has to be the double peak, the second peak of Mons Hadley. All right, that's what it would have to be. From this perspective, from Station 6A, that's what we would be seeing, Mons Hadley's second peak, except that it's completely wrong here in these photographs, in this panorama. It's wrong for at least a couple reasons. One, the actual double peak, all right, is they're close together. That's why it's called a double peak. And you can see it in the actual photographs. They're close together. They're next to each other. The second one is only a little more distant from the landing site than the first one. But here, you can see it looks like a completely different mountain, very far off. Secondly, you have this mountain. This would have to be another mountain slightly in front of Mons Hadley in the view, in the line of sight to the second peak. All right? That is not there in reality. Here is this wide view, a lunar orbiter photograph. Here they are, Station 6A, about right here, and you would see the double peak, the second peak, I should say, very easily, right through this gap, kind of like valley in between the two peaks. Okay, as I mentioned before, Mons Hadley is in fact a double peak, as this overlay shows. And here's Station 6A, again, right there to orient us. Here you are, here. And again, you would look right across, right through this gap and see the second peak, and it wouldn't be very far from the first peak. You would see it rise from the valley floor. A little slight rise there, more major rise there, and then the peak itself. That's what you would see. Here's Station 6A again, same thing, right across like so. It wouldn't be that silly little thing peeking out way in the distance as the Apollo photograph like this. Okay, it wouldn't be like this with that little thing peeking out, again, as I said, way in the distance, with this mountain in the way. That does not exist. And you can see it here. You can see in NASA's own contour map, all right, that this little plateau is just that, a little plateau about 1,000 meters high, not a couple thousand meters high, as this is showing, because this is about half the height of Mons Hadley. So it would have to be close to 2,000 meters high. That is not there in reality. I think this photograph here shows it best. That's just a slight rise, just a slight plateau. It is not this mountain here. All right, so that's fake. Now, let's continue with this panorama. This panorama, by the way, is 3/4 of the entire 360-degree panorama. It continues from here, and we're going to see this momentarily. Here are the individual photographs of that panorama, which are more clear than the panorama itself. Here we go. We already saw this, the fake Rill and the fake Hill 305. Okay, the fake Mons Hadley, the fake second peak, the fake intervening mountains between Mons Hadley and Mons Hadley Delta. And here we go to the base of Mons Hadley Delta. And what do we see? The lunar rover tracks, climbing up the side of Mons Hadley Delta as if they were on the beach, sand dunes on the beach. In the desert, a large sand dune. Willy-nilly climbing up the side of a mountain, which you can't do on Earth, except maybe on the beach. A real mountain, you don't climb up, without roads. Well, what do you think they need to build roads for? It's a cartoon. The whole thing is a cartoon. How are they going to climb up the side of a mountain on the rugged moon? We've seen how rugged the moon is. Everything on the moon. Valley floors, mountains, okay? There's nothing smooth on the moon. But that's what they claim they did. The mission called for Scott and Irwin to climb the hillside a bit west of Spur and then turn to the east and make a 3-kilometer drive roughly along a contour line. Yeah, right. Driving kilometers along the side of a mountain without roads. The hillside had the appearance of a dry, sandy, well-used beach covered with soft hummocks and with poorly defined shallow craters. A sandy, well-used beach. That's what they were driving on. An earth beach or a sand dune somewhere. This is not the moon. It's ridiculous. Literally, it's cartoon. All right, moving on to more foolishness. This is the surface, the valley floor surface. We're going to look at the surface of the moon here at the Apollo landing site, Apollo 15 landing site. Okay. So you say, okay, well, what's to see here? What's unusual here? This is the actual lunar surface. This is a real photograph from the lunar orbiter spacecraft 4 years before Apollo 15, which was in 1971. All right, this photograph is from 1967, before Apollo, when they were planning all these missions. All right, that's why they have all these labels here. And this shows the real surface of the moon, which is completely covered with small craters, as I have mentioned many times before. That's what the moon is like. Now, notice this here. There's some kind of defect in this photograph, either that or an intentional airbrushing, because they didn't want to show us some details or whatever. But anyway, so that's this side of Mons Hadley Delta. Other than that, you can see things pretty clearly. Look at St. George crater. Look how craggy, absolutely craggy and rough it is. Compare that to this powder donut thing here, this laughable fake crater there. Okay, look at the huge contrast there. Now we're going to look more closely at this region here. Notice this pair of craters, and then this larger crater and this North Complex label here. Okay, we're going to look at that more closely in an enlargement. Okay, North Complex, the two pairs of craters, that large crater. This is the phony Apollo NASA version. Okay, so here's the real photograph. This is the phony one. All right, and this photograph, both photographs are centered on this crater right here. That crater right there. To give you the size scale of this image, this crater right here is 650 meters wide. And this one right here, this perfectly round one, is 150 meters wide. When you look back and forth between these two photographs, they're vastly different. And what you notice is that craters that are in this one, like say these craters right here, okay, they're gone. They're just plain gone in the phony photograph. And there are countless. You couldn't possibly count all the craters that are gone in this phony photograph. And even craters that aren't gone are softened, much less deep and sharply defined. Okay, so what they seem to have done is to airbrush this photograph. The original photograph. They took this original photograph, they made it light gray. They took out all the contrast. They airbrushed a whole lot of detail out, and they even probably defocused it. Okay, they just totally transformed it into something that you could drive through. All right, that must be why they did this, because you can imagine driving through this, just missing the larger craters. All right, you'd have a little bit of bumps, but you'd be able to drive through that. You would not be able to drive through this. You wouldn't even think of it. All right, here's another version of that same lunar orbiter photograph, but instead of labels, we have a whole lot of grid lines. We have no pristine photograph from the lunar orbiter without anything added onto it. This photograph is actually a little bit more detailed than that high contrast photograph that I showed you earlier. And when you compare it to the fake view of the landing site, you can see a vast difference as before. This is an enlargement, this area right here. And when you compare the good photograph, the real photograph, with the fake one, you can see, again, as before, a complete transformation. And this is all more for your information, for those of you who want to study this even more carefully. I already made the point a while ago, that the point being that this is phony, this is real. And you would not be thinking of driving through this. Look at the difference with St. George crater. There's just no resemblance. This is literally like a powder donut, sugar powder donut, whatever the term is for that thing. You know what I'm talking about. All right, let's move on to look even more closely at St. George crater. This crater is huge. It's 1.5 miles wide when you include the rim, which is very prominent. This crater right here is about the size of meteor crater. And you can see how much larger this one is, okay? And the astronauts would have gotten a wonderful view from their landing site, all right? And you can see in this and the next few photographs that this crater has some peculiarities. It's first of all not completely circular. It has a wide rim, okay, which you can see here. It's pretty distinctive. here you can see how wide, very wide rim. And it's also somewhat irregular, like you have this bump here. All right, so you have this very large crater with a very wide, prominent rim. It's not completely circular, and it has irregularities. But this is what they show us from Station 9A. This is supposed to be St. George crater. It doesn't even look like a crater. It looks like a shallow depression, very smooth, very regular, symmetrical, no wide rim. All right? And look at this. Look how featureless it is. It's ridiculous. Now, worst of all, from NASA's perspective, you can prove conclusively that those are two very different things because they're different sizes. So if that photograph, this photograph I just showed you, is taken from Station 9A. All right? If you take a protractor, this thing right here that we used in our high school, and you lay the vertex, that thing right there, all right, at Station 9A, you would get, or you will get, as I did, the angular size of St. George crater. All right, and that ends up being 40 degrees. That's how wide this thing is in angular size, in degrees. Okay. Now, if you take this panorama from Station 9A, see these little features there, these mini craters. This is a 360-degree panorama all the way across the horizon. So that's 360 degrees. And you take this little section of that panorama, the length of St. George crater, okay, if you take that as a fraction of the whole, what you get is, on my screen, 19 millimeters over 262 millimeters. That works out to this fraction, and you multiply that by 360, and you get 26.1 degrees. So this thing here in the photograph, all right, is roughly 26 degrees, versus in reality what it is 40 degrees. It's only 2/3 the size of the real thing. These two things here, this crater in this real photograph and this thing in the Apollo photograph, are two completely different things. This is fake as hell. Moving on to Apollo 16, right there. This is in mega highlands to distinguish it from the moderate highlands of Apollo 14. There they are among the big boys, the big craters. The site is right there. And here it is again, closer up, right there. So here's a close-up of the landing site. Right there is the landing site. And make a note of this crater here, North Ray crater. We're going to get back to that. But first, I want to compare this photograph with this older pre-Apollo lunar orbiter photograph of the landing site. All right, so there's the one, and there's the other. This is fake in many ways. It's doctored, okay? This is the original, and you can see many differences. Remember Apollo 14, we had that one crater, cone crater, okay, which was photoshopped in. Here we have this same doctoring, but on a much larger scale. And I made a note, I listed all the differences, the major differences that I noticed, and there are others. These are the more major ones. And you can pause here and you can study these images. I'm not going to go through all of this, but I'll point out a few. So here's that crater right there. It's simply not there in the phony photograph. Okay, that crater right there. Look at this crater here, which is deep and should be seen in here, but it's not. It's simply not there. Okay, this arrow, by the way, this arrow right here, it doesn't stay on, and I can't make it stay on. But we're going to make do with it anyway. Okay, right there. So that crater is not there in the fake photograph. Now, look at this crater here. It's actually added. Okay, it's not there in the original. This crater here is added. It's not there in the original. So there are several such differences which give away this fakery. This is simply a doctored image in many ways. And there's that North Crater. Okay, there it is in the fake one. So there are many craters that are in this one but are missing in the other one, and vice versa. So undoubtedly, I mean, there's no question about it, that second image, this one here, is doctored, badly doctored. All right. Fakery, as we've seen already long ago, is par for the course for Apollo. Okay, back to North Crater. Okay, they're going to do an EVA, extravehicular activity, in other words, an excursion, a hike, actually this time, of course, driving, up to North Ray Crater, that one, that right there. All right, and here it is again. And closer up, they're going to go right to the edge, as if you can drive up to the edge of a large crater and not, you know, and avoid the boulders, driving. Here it is, a photograph allegedly from orbit, and you can see that, you know, it's this donut, sugar donut thing, totally phony. This is meteor crater on Earth, and it's a good comparison because it's roughly the same size, almost the same diameter. North Ray Crater is just a little less wide in diameter, but it's 40% deeper, all right, than Meteor Crater. So it would be pretty much as impressive as Meteor Crater. But this is what they show us. This is supposed to be a crater roughly equivalent to Meteor Crater on Earth. This silly thing here with rocks visible, clearly visible on the other side. It is just ridiculous, but we're getting used to this, I think. In this photograph, you can see a little bit more clearly the rocks going around to the other side. All right, they're just a few meters away. This is a few meters away. This is a few more meters away. We're talking about tens of meters. This is the other side of the crater. This is a very small crater, a very small hole that they dug somewhere. It is not a huge. Oh, and here's a close-up. This is not a huge crater like Meteor Crater on Earth. It's that simple. Can you see rocks this size 3/4 of a mile away? Of course not. All right? You don't see rocks the same of the size that you see right here near the edge all the way to the other edge. It's ridiculous. These rocks right here, you can't resolve them after 100 meters or so. All right? You obviously cannot see them, rocks like these, on the other side of the crater. It's, I mean, how stupid can it get, all right? Like you see here, this is fake. That's all there is to it. I'm getting repetitive here, but that's how it is. Okay, so there's the landing site right there, and it's among these very large craters. We're talking, I think this is 60 miles wide, or is it 60 kilometers? I think it's 60 miles. And this is about 80 miles wide. I'm going to double check that, but I'm pretty sure that's the dimensions, that's the sizes that we're talking about. So this area is mega highlands, and it is blasted by countless craters, large ones, and therefore it would have boulders and all kinds of debris all over, including around the Apollo landing site. This would not be a pristine area. It would not be smooth. There would also be all kinds of small craters, of course, which are ubiquitous on the moon. And this is the panorama that they show us, or one of two panoramas that I'm going to show you at the landing site, all the way across 360 degrees. It's completely bland, completely featureless. There are no craters or boulders. This is the second panorama, same thing. How bland can the moon be, according to Apollo? Totally unreal. Obviously, you can drive to your heart's content all over this kind of terrain, and that's what they claim they do. Drive and drive and drive, as if they were, you know, on country roads on the Earth. Okay, even on the Earth, you need roads. And here, lo and behold, is a boulder. Wow, a boulder. This is literally one of a handful of boulders that they found in all the missions, and they had to drive far and wide to find them. Boulders like this would be all over the place, and also much larger ones on the real moon. But this is all they can show us, because they're not really on the moon. This is a large version of the sea rock, a very large version of the sea rock. It's a prop. I wouldn't be surprised if it's not even a real rock. This is what Apollo 16 shows us, essentially nothing. And they're in mega highlands with among all those craters, and there should be boulders and debris and all kinds of geological features. They show us nothing. Okay, we're moving more quickly now. Apollo 15 was the big one, all kinds of nonsense, but we still have a few more points to get through. Okay, so there's Apollo 17 right there, and it's physically, as far as the landing site goes, it's like a small version of Apollo 15, which by the way is over here. All right, so it's a smaller valley with less tall mountains. There's a close-up. The landing site is around there, and these are the mountains surrounding it. So it's another mountain valley. There it is. More close-up. Now this arrow point is slightly off. The actual landing site is a little to the left of that arrow point, right there. Right there. Okay, now notice this crater here. It's a little larger than Meteor Crater on Earth. And that's to compare it to this crater, which they're going to visit, Camelot Crater. Okay, we're going to look at what they have to show us with regard to Camelot Crater. That one right there. They landed here. They're going to drive all over the place, as they do now. All right, they're going to go right along the edge of Camelot Crater, as if you could drive around the edge of a crater where there would be beaucoup boulders. But anyway, that's what they claim they do. So they should be able to show us in all kinds of detail, without any question whatsoever, without any doubt, a grand crater, right? Well, they don't. Now, Camelot Crater is about half the size of Meteor Crater, but that's still a very substantial crater. And notice this Shorty Crater, which is about 110 meters. I'm gonna point that out in a minute or so. All right, but first Camelot Crater. This is what they show us. This is supposed to be a crater half the size of Meteor Crater on Earth. Okay, you take half the size of this Meteor Crater, and it's still a huge, humongous crater. This is not a humongous crater by any stretch. There's the lunar rover to give you the size scale. You can see the rocks on the other side. Again, that's the dead giveaway. In this sharper image, there are the rocks on the other side. If this was really a 600-meter wide crater, you wouldn't be seeing rocks on the other side. And here's a close-up with the rocks clearly visible. Okay, this thing is fake as heck. Now, this is not fake. This is clearly a real hole, a real crater. This is Shorty Crater. This is that one that I mentioned I was going to get back to. This is 110 meters wide. Now, they can show this to the bottom, and they do so in all its glory, all right? Why do they do this for this crater and not the others? Because this is a real crater. It's just a small crater, that's all, that they blasted in the desert. They can't show us a huge crater similar to Meteor Crater because they had none. They had none. They were on the moon set. They had no such crater. So they had to fake those. But this one they did show us. That's fake. That's Camelot Crater. That one looks even smaller than Shorty Crater. Because it probably is. And this is going back to North Ray Crater from Apollo 16. Okay, this is Apollo 17. We're on Apollo 17 now, but for a second we're going back to Apollo 16. This is North Ray Crater. These craters, Camelot Crater, North Ray Crater, these are phony little craters. They're not what was advertised, large craters on the moon. That's why they don't go to the edge and photograph the inside like they did with Shorty Crater. Their crater is more or less like this in Arizona or somewhere in the American deserts. All right, now watch this. This is really incredible. Now this is another lunar orbiter photograph pre-Apollo, and we're going to blow it up. So it's going to be a bit fuzzy. Okay, but we're going to compare that to the Apollo 17 landing site, the official photograph of the Apollo 17 landing site, which is that. Now, this is fake, and it's fake like with exclamation marks. Because look at this scene here. There's that big crater there, look at that one crater. Whereas here you have about a half dozen craters of roughly the same size. These are two completely different landscapes. That is not that. It's that simple. All right, here you have something elongated. Here you have nothing. You have hardly anything. This is Camelot crater, right there. Here it's not even there. These are two different landscapes. This is different. These are two large craters aligned kind of like this. These are three craters aligned somewhat differently. These, again, are two, clearly, without question, two different scenes. One real, one fake. And here's the dead giveaway. It's frightful, really. Look at this. That peak right there is gone in the fake image. It's so conspicuous, so brazen, that I have a feeling that it was done deliberately by a whistleblower to alert us. Now, notice the shadows are identical. All right, so you can't blame the loss of that peak on different shadows, different sun angles. The sun angles are the same here. Okay, see this shadow here, that shadow there. The shadows are the same, so the sun angle is the same. So this peak should be there, but it's not. Clear-cut fakery. What we're seeing here is very likely an aerial view like this of a crater field on Earth, like this one in Arizona at Cinder Lake. And the indications are the similarity in the sizes of the craters. Okay, all these craters are, the larger ones are about the same size, about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, more than a half dozen. All right. Like here, you have craters that are cookie cutter sizes. All right. You have set sizes, not random continuous sizes, because the explosive charges were in certain amounts. They weren't random. They weren't, as I said, they weren't continuous. So that's probably what we have here. We have probably an aerial view of an artificial crater field on Earth with the fake mountains, and they look phony anyway. Here's the Cinder Lake field, just in case you forgot early on in this video. That's what we're dealing with. Probably in Apollo 17 as well. And you can see, again, look at uniformity of the sizes of these craters versus this real image which I showed you earlier. This is one of those mare regions that I showed you where there are all kinds of craters in the mares. Look at the variety, jumble, the chaotic nature of these craters. They're all kinds of sizes. They're all types, shallow, deep, old, new, overlaying each other, overlapping each other, versus this, which is so nice and neat. This is an indication of a crater field, an artificial crater field. Now look at the terrain itself in Apollo 17. It follows the same pattern as all the other missions, which is blank, all right? Where are the boulders? Where are the craters? There are practically none. A featureless terrain with fake mountains. That's South Massive. This is North Massive. Okay. Oh wow, look at that. Maybe a little boulder, all right? But otherwise, we're dealing with a phony blank landscape with fake mountains. Further fatal problems with the Apollo missions. First of all, heat. The Apollo astronauts were supposed to have worked walked around, hiked around, literally run around in 250-degree heat. That's how hot the surface of the moon gets. It has no atmosphere. The moon has no atmosphere to mitigate the blazing rays of the sun. We're talking about oven-type heat, hotter than boiling water. So at the end of the day, these astronauts are supposed to have climbed into this lunar module, which is doing nothing but sitting there soaking up the sun. All right, at the end of their workday, and I say workday because the actual day on the moon lasts 2 weeks. So there's no respite from night for 2 weeks. So literally the lunar module is just sitting there soaking up the sun. It would have to be an oven when they go in there to try to sleep. The lunar rover, what kind of magical car is this that can stand 250-degree heat? And how can the astronaut just sit on this thing? All of these materials would be getting up to 250 degrees. Imagine a car in our summers on a hot summer day. Remember how hot that is. This is over twice that heat, because I mean, on the Earth we're talking, something like 100 degrees. This is twice that heat. The lunar rover, this is the operations handbook, states explicitly that you can't operate this thing over, well, here operating temperature at maximum 125 degrees. The survival, whatever that means, like the car would croak, 140 degrees. This, by the way, is for the battery. But you can imagine that the entire car is not designed to withstand 250-degree heat, because what vehicle is. These are the Hasselblad cameras that the astronauts used. They're very fine cameras, but they're essentially just slightly modified versions of commercial products. Earthly cameras, not designed to withstand huge amounts of heat. The modifications were minor, like larger controls, so that the astronauts could flip these things in with their gloved hands. These cameras were not totally redesigned. They were essentially like that. And like any other ordinary camera, they had internal gears and delicate mechanisms, some plastic parts. Okay, all of these things would be adversely affected by 250-degree heat. These things are precision little mechanisms, and the plastic would start to melt. The lenses, like any other lenses, are closely fitting in these metal and plastic rings. All right, all of these things are not designed to withstand extreme heat. This is a regular camera, a Canon camera, and the specifications sheet says that maximum operating temperature is 113 degrees. Here's a Nikon manual on temperatures, and it says Nikon cameras are designed to work under specific operating temperatures. These temperatures are between 0 and plus 40 degrees centigrade, which is 104 degrees Fahrenheit. This is the kind of temperature that cameras are designed to work in, maximum, a little over 100 degrees. Same thing with TV cameras. These are the TV cameras that the Apollo astronauts allegedly used. And here's a couple of them, one there and one there. And here's the still camera, the Hasselblad, by the way. All of these are sitting there soaking up heat up to 250 degrees. Remember that. And here's the TV camera operations manual. It says explicitly, the camera should never be allowed to reach a temperature colder than that or hotter than 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, the astronauts themselves are supposed to have been in air-conditioned suits. These suits are supposed to have been air-conditioned with tubes flowing with water flowing through them. Okay, that was supposed to be their air conditioning. However, there's no evidence that this actually worked, because this is a closed system. You have to expel that heat. Just like in a room with an air conditioner, the heat has to be taken out of the room. A hot car, you have to expel the heat through some medium, okay? Air in normal air conditioning, or liquid. This is a closed system. You can't have air conditioning without an escape of the heat. And there's no evidence that anything ever escaped. The liquid, the hot that was heated by the astronaut's body, All right? There was never any evidence that anything was ejected out of this suit. Here's what Ralph Renee says. If they had really had suit air conditioners that worked, every time the suit was vented into the high vacuum of space, the rocket effect should have been spectacular. A rapidly expanding fog of ice crystals, that's what NASA says, it's more likely to have been water droplets or steam, would have reflected the brilliant, unfiltered sunlight, spraying millions of tiny diamond-like crystals about and producing a brilliant, dazzling, and unforgettable display. We can be sure our astronauts never released water in this manner, since not one of the thousands of pictures taken on the moon has ever shown such a display. This is sort of what we would expect to see. In this case, somebody tosses hot water into cold air, but whether these would be ice crystals or water droplets, steam, whatever, you would have seen something like that shooting out of the astronaut suits on the moon. But we never saw anything of the sort. Overall, NASA never explains in a serious, believable manner how they dealt with 250-degree heat. Look at this lunar module. It is laughable. It is literally laughable. This is supposed to be a spaceship. What is with all this junk? Okay, and the haphazard manner in which it's distributed. Okay, they say, well, we have to have reflection, to reflect the material to reflect heat. Well, why is this dark? Okay, and why is this light and this is dark? Well, everything is haphazard here, arbitrary, totally, it looks like a bad high school project. Look at the fit and finish. There is no fit and finish on this thing. Everything's warped. It looks like, you know, a poorly constructed thing, to say the least. And critics have had great fun with this. NASA claims they went to the moon in this pile of shit. All right? And if you zoom in, you can see foil, tape, and curtain rods. Literally, these things are for all the world, like the curtain rods our family would get in the 70s from the department store. All right? That looks like a cheap curtain rod. And what is this? Foil or paper of some sort. And that's tape, a Scotch tape. What nonsense is this? This is supposed to be a spaceship. Look at the lack of neatness, you know, no, as I said, no fit and finish. Warped panels, paper. This is supposed to be a precision rocket or a set of rockets to, you know, guide the spaceship through space with extreme precision. This guy says it all. What the bleep are these? Blow dryers? So, you know, parts you need to build your own spacecraft. Lots of big sheets of cardboard, a big roll of paper, a few old curtain rods, some floodlight holders, an old TV antenna, a roll of gold foil, some small plastic and rods, a few used egg cartons, and lots of Scotch tape to hold it all together in the hostile environment of the moon. Now look at this here. This is the ascent stage. This is the descent stage. The lunar module is in two stages. This is the rocket that brings it down to the surface, and then there's a rocket in here which is used to blast off from the surface of the moon. And only the ascent stage, the top half here, the cabin with the astronauts in it, leaves the moon, and it leaves this behind. So this is that ascent stage. This is Apollo 16, supposedly orbiting the moon, or going back up to meet the service and command module. And this photograph is taken from the command module by the astronaut that's left up there orbiting, while the other two are on the surface. What on earth is this? Look at this. I mean, this is ridiculous. That's supposed to be a spaceship. That's supposed to be a precision machine. It's a bad joke. Okay, so you say, well, it's suffered some kind of damage. Yeah, but still, it looks ridiculous. I mean, you know, my vocabulary is limited when it comes to these descriptive terms. It's farcical. How's that word? Farcical. The lunar module has been described as a piece of junk, looking more like a homeless person's shelter or a cardboard shack in a Brazilian favela than a spaceship. Gerard Wisniewski says, it looks more like a slum dwelling after a hurricane than a vehicle suitable for traveling in space. Compare that lunar module, that joke of a spaceship, to this actual spaceship, which is the DCX. This was developed in the late 1990s. It was designed as a reusable spaceship to go up into Earth orbit and come back. And look how nice and neat it is, and aerodynamic. And well constructed, apparently. Compare that to this thing. Now, of course, NASA will say, well, you don't need aerodynamics in the vacuum of space and in the vacuum, which is the surface of the moon, which is true, but still, we're not just talking about aerodynamics. We're talking about something reasonably professional looking. Further evidence that this whole thing was a joke is that they never actually landed this machine on the Earth, much less the moon, in training. Okay, the first use of that lunar module was the one Apollo 11 landing, the actual thing. There was never any practice run. Whoever heard of such a complex, such a important piece of machinery not practiced on beforehand? This is what they trained on. The Lunar Landing Training Vehicle, or another term was the Lunar Landing Research Vehicle, which is nothing like the lunar module. So in other words, they never did train on the lunar module. This thing here operates on jets, not rockets. It's nothing like the lunar module. Supposedly an astronaut or somebody training with this thing. And as a matter of fact, that machine crashed a number of times, including once with Neil Armstrong flying, and he barely escaped with his life. Here he is parachuting from this thing after it crashed. So here's what Dennis Semino says about Grumman's lunar module plans. Grumman was the manufacturer. I looked at these drawings extensively. The designs are completely and wholly inadequate. Anybody with any physics and design background would take one look at it and dismiss it offhand as being foolish and goofy. Bill Woods, another engineer, says about the lunar module proposal from Grumman, a 110-page document for a $6.9 billion program is an outrageously small document. There's no way that a reviewer could determine whether or not the contractor is going to accomplish anything worthwhile based on 110 pages of documentation for that size program. Programs of similar size and cost are tens of thousands of pages long. He continues, you wouldn't need a very long proposal if you weren't really going to build a lunar module that really had to work. If you were going to be building lunar modules that ended up in museums or on displays, then you could probably do that for a few $1 million, and that might only require a 110-page proposal. So multi-billion-dollar projects like this aircraft carrier or this nuclear submarine, those require huge amounts of documentation, like Bill Wood said, thousands of pages. All right, but this lunar module never did go to the moon. It was always a model, like a toy, and it ended up in museums, all right, the various specimens. So yeah, so they got away with a very small 110-page proposal because that's all it was for. It was always just for show. It was never a real flying machine. More evidence that it wasn't for real. This is a real rocket, a 7,500-pound thruster, and of course it shoots out a flame, okay, or a plume as another term for that. Whoever heard of a rocket without a flame? Even the space shuttle in the vacuum of space produces a flame. So the fact that the lunar module was in a vacuum is no reason at all that it would have no flame, no plume. Now on this website, which tries to explain away all the anomalies of Apollo, this is Clavius, this website right here, Clavius, they try to say that flames don't always have to, that rockets don't always have to produce flames. But the example that they use, where they say that the flame is almost invisible, is nowhere near almost invisible. You can clearly see this plume, and you would certainly see it in the black vacuum of space. And in fact, all the depictions of the lunar module before its actual use showed a prominent rocket flame. There and there and there. All right, and as a matter of fact, the team that constructed one of those lunar modules, this one right here, and by the way, this isn't Apollo 10, it's just the number of the particular lunar module that these guys made. The builders of each lunar module were given the privilege of designing the insignia, a patch, for the lunar module. And these guys made one with the flame, rocket flame. Wernher von Braun's book, he shows the rockets landing on the moon with a large plume and also taking off with flames trailing the rockets, right? common sense, rocket science says that rockets have flames, but not Apollo, not the lunar module. Here it is, the ascent stage blasting off from the moon, and not the slightest hint of a rocket. There's a still photo. No rocket whatsoever. And not only did the lunar module produce no flame, it produced no sound, which is even more unbelievable, because there definitely, without question, would have been a whole lot of noise involved with these rockets. So this, by the way, is when the thing takes off. There would have been explosions, which I'll explain in a second, but there is no such thing recorded in the audio recordings. And in the famous descent of the Apollo 11 lunar module down to the surface, there was no sound at all. You can listen to this and you will hear no rocket noise, just the astronauts' voices and Houston. So this is what Gerard Wisniewski says. And here he's speaking specifically about when the ascent stage of the lunar module takes off. He's talking about this point right here, at this point right here. Explosions would cause the module to shake when the ascent stage breaks away from the landing stage with the help of explosive charges. When the abort stage button in the cockpit is pressed, the bolts that have been holding the landing and ascent stages together are released. At the same moment, knives driven by explosive charges cut through the various cables and leads. With all this going on, the lunar module should have been trembling violently. Werner von Braun says, at x minus 4 seconds, a thunderous rumble will sound in the passenger spheres. The rocket motors have started. In many of the Apollo recordings of both the descent to and ascent from the moon, I have not listened to all of them, this is me speaking here, there is almost complete silence except for the astronauts and Houston's voices. There is no significant background noise from the rocket engines or any other source. The Apollo 11 descent is infamously quiet. The Apollo 16 ascent is one partial exception. There was a slight explosion. Of course, in a real moon landing program, all of the descents and takeoffs would be very noisy events. Regardless of the vacuum in the lunar environment, and therefore no possibility of sound outside of the spacecraft, the inside of the lunar module is filled with air and therefore sound. Furthermore, the structure of the spacecraft itself would transmit the vibration and sound of the engines. In the NASA report on the Apollo 13 explosion in the supply model, and that was the famous explosion that derailed the Apollo 13 mission, it says all 3 astronauts heard and felt a pretty large bang. And one of the astronauts, Lovell, says, we all heard the explosion together. So there definitely would have been sound associated with the rockets of the lunar module. Here's the ascent rocket. It's inside the cabin, as shown here. Here's the astronaut, literally a foot or two away from the engine. Although the astronauts in the lunar module were only about 40 centimeters away from the running rocket engines, there is no engine noise to be heard in the background to the radio communications. Okay, so that was the ascent rocket. Here's the descent rocket, and it's also within the structure of the lunar module. If not sharing the air of the lunar module, it certainly is connected structurally to the lunar module in general, and therefore it would transmit vibrations and sound. Now, many researchers say that this rocket should have caused a crater on the moon, and there's never any such crater. The NASA rebutters say that the rocket wouldn't have had to be that strong because of the moon's 1/6 Earth gravity, and there's some plausibility there. So let's say for the sake of argument that a crater is not a necessary result of that rocket. Okay, well, at least, and it's a very powerful rocket, 10,000-pound thruster, at least you would expect that the sand, the dust and sand and loose dirt would be blown away, all right? That there would be some effect of that rocket. But in the photographs of the lunar modules right underneath them, after landing, in all of them, there is not the slightest indication of that rocket actually having been used, having been blasting the surface. All of the dirt is undisturbed. The dirt is undisturbed. And you can see that nothing is blown away because the footprints of the astronauts, okay, are clearly visible there. And so it wasn't blown away. The dirt was not blown away. So not only did the rocket produce no crater, which we'll grant as a possibility, it didn't even disturb the surface at all and didn't blow away the dirt, which is unbelievable. Now compare that lunar module to this, the DCX, which produced a flame. It made a lot of noise when you watch the videos of this thing taking off, and it also produced small craters in the desert, in the surface of the desert where it landed. So much so that their project designers were afraid that the thing would tip over because it would land unevenly in the crater that it made. So the DCX produces flame, noise, a small crater. Apollo lunar module, nothing. Another problem with this alleged spaceship, it is extremely ungainly. It's top heavy, and it only has one rocket. So in this illustration, this here would represent the one rocket lunar module, and this would be a much more efficient design, more effective. This easy lander would be much easier to control. First, it isn't tall and skinny like the Falcon 9. The center of mass is much closer to the main thrusters so that they wouldn't exert as much torque to change the rotational motion. On top of that, there are multiple thrusters so that you could vary the thrust to create zero torque if you wanted. So this is the design of the DCX, broadly speaking. It has 4 rockets on its broad base, at each corner of its broad base. That gives it a whole lot more stability and maneuverability. And as a matter of fact, unlike the lunar module, this was actually tested successfully. It takes off, all right, and lands successfully. They did a number of tests of this thing and it worked. Now we can ask, why on earth are they testing this thing? Why are they having to design a new rocket and a whole new rocket design if Apollo had worked so well? Why wouldn't they just continue using Apollo? The high center of gravity lunar module has been deemed inherently unstable in its vertical axis by engineers. Such a machine would have been nearly impossible to balance with the heavy lunar rover stored off-center. Any slight inertia going sideways would be difficult for the reaction jets to correct. The lunar module could be stabilized with modern computers, but these were not available in the 1960s. Ralph Renee says, how do you land an unwieldy single-jet vertical landing machine that's unbalanced? So, to sum up, this thing here was not a real spaceship. It didn't ever land on the moon. It was a large stage prop. Now let's look at this trip to the moon as a whole. It was extremely complicated. There were in this diagram here, there are 134 separate steps. Now, Wernher von Braun had proposed building a space station before going directly to the moon, and that would give the astronauts, NASA, a lot of experience, you know, playing around in space, basically. But no, NASA decided to go directly all the way to the moon. Nothing like this had been done before. Nothing remotely like this had been done before. Just blasting off and getting into orbit and coming back down is a much simpler procedure. There's no way I'm going to go through all these steps, especially in this complicated diagram. So we'll look at this simpler diagram, and even here, there are 20 separate steps. So to get a feel for, you know, just how complex this whole operation was, we're going to go through these steps. So you have blast off, and then the first stage separates, then the second stage is ejected, and so you're left with a third stage. And then this stage fires to get the spaceship out of Earth orbit and on its way to the moon. And then after that, there's a complex little operation, a little maneuver, where the service and command module, that's the command module right there, that's the service module. For now, they're like one spaceship. The service and command module comes out of that last stage, does a somersault, and then connects with the lunar module, which is inside here, and then pulls out with it, so that you have the combined service command module and lunar module together. And then after that, okay, that's this operation here. And then after that, they jettison the rocket stage. Okay, so here they are. They do a mid-course correction, and then they get closer to the moon and they do a burn for lunar orbit insertion. And then once they're either near the moon or in orbit, they separate. The lunar module separates from the service and command module. And then the lunar module descends, and then it lands. And then after the astronauts have done all their running around and exploring and all, then you have liftoff of the ascent stage from the moon, leaving the descent stage behind. And then you have a rendezvous where the lunar module redocks with the command and service module. And keep in mind that none of this has been done before Apollo, the first Apollo that went to the moon, which I believe was Apollo 8. None of this had been done before in full. Okay. All right. The lunar module is jettisoned because it's no longer needed. They do a burn for a mid-course correction. And then once they get close to the Earth, the service and command module separate, and the service module, they get rid of that. So then you have the command module, and then it goes into the atmosphere. And this is a very, very tricky procedure here, because it has to come in at just the right angle so that it doesn't either destroy itself with too much friction, too much heat, and too many G's, too much gravity, or it could skip off. If it comes too shallow, it can skip off the atmosphere and end up in space, outer space. So anyway, so they do that, and then finally splashdown. So in this simplified model, you still have 20 separate, delicate procedures that have to be done precisely. Bill Kaysing, citing a 1959 Rocketdyne study, noted that the statistical probability of humans getting to the moon and back is 0.0014. That's just a little over 1 in 1,000. He says there were 85 separate maneuvers involved in each lunar landing. The statistical probability of complete success 6 times in a row without a single failure is practically 0. And here he's talking about the 6 times where they landed on the moon. Overall, they went to the moon 9 times and came back successfully. The only glitch was Apollo 13 with that explosion, which ended up being a success story anyway. And really, they undoubtedly did it for drama more than anything else. The whole thing was a show, and that was part of the show, and that just added a little bit of human drama. And it was just a success story after all, how they persevered and all that. In real life, for instance, with the shuttle program, you have accidents. They're almost inevitable. You had 2 huge accidents with the shuttle, the Challenger and Columbia, and NASA lost 14 astronauts. But here's Apollo with 1960s technology going all the way to the moon and back 9 times with not a single loss of life or injury. It was downright magical. But of course it didn't happen, and NASA admits it. In this fairly recent video, Orion Trial by Fire, this NASA engineer, Kelly Smith, explains in great detail how this second-generation spaceship, the Orion capsule, is going to go all the way to the moon or other bodies, allegedly, like Mars or asteroids, okay? This is an animation. This ship never actually took off, but that's what it would have looked like. And here it goes to, let's say, the moon, okay, because they intended to go back to the moon according to this project here. All right, and he explains all of this and the spacecraft coming back, just like it did with Apollo, parachuting back. Okay, the whole operation is described as if it had never been done before, as if it was totally novel. Smith describes every stage of the Orion mission, a successor and in many ways a close copy of Apollo, as if it's never been done before. Everything is described exactly as if it were completely novel, as I just said, as if we had not yet gone into space beyond Earth orbit. And there's no mention whatsoever of Apollo, just as if it had never existed. And during this video, Smith describes the dangerous high radiation Van Allen belt zones that the spaceship has to go through. And the video shows this with these garish colors to make it seem, you know, all the more scary, which it would be in real life. And he says, as we get further away from Earth, we'll pass through the Van Allen belts, an area of dangerous radiation. Sensors aboard this first unmanned craft will record radiation levels for scientists to study. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space. What more does one need to hear? They have not solved these challenges, okay? And they have not sent people through this region of space. Notice that the first craft is unmanned. because they need to study the radiation levels. What is all this about? All this is saying, in so many words, that Apollo didn't happen. And this is reinforced by the words of this guy, Terry Virts, a NASA astronaut, ISS International Space Station commander, who says this: "The plan that NASA has is to build a rocket that will be able to launch the Orion capsule to destinations beyond Earth orbit. Right now, we only can fly in Earth orbit. That's the farthest that we can go. And this new system is going to allow us to go beyond and hopefully take humans to the moon, Mars, asteroids, and we're building these building block components in order to allow us to do that eventually." Listen to what this guy says. He's speaking English. We understand English. He's saying that they didn't go anywhere. Right now, we can only fly in Earth orbit. That's the farthest that we can go. How much more explicit can anybody say this? Hopefully, we'll take humans to the moon. And we're going to do this eventually. They have not gone before. That's what he's saying here. And this astronaut, I don't know her name. The video never told us her name. She says, "We're really pushing the boundaries in terms of where we're going forward with exploration. This is really the beginning, I think, of human beings leaving low Earth orbit." Are we supposed to believe she never heard of Apollo? No, she knows all about Apollo. She knows it was fiction. She's speaking the truth here. Human beings have not left low Earth orbit. And this is evidenced for showing you many reasons, but this one here is quite compelling. Here is Apollo 13, 200 miles toward the moon, in other words, almost there. 200,000 miles is what I should have said if I didn't. And what do you see? Blue sky in the windows of the Apollo spacecraft, hundreds of thousands of miles away from Earth. They were not near the moon. They were in low Earth orbit. That's all this space program did. They got people up there in weightlessness, acting like they were traveling to the moon. They weren't going anywhere. This is as far as human beings have gotten with their own spacecraft. Now, frankly, alien spacecraft may have taken humans farther, who knows where, but with our own technology, with our own spacecraft, this is the farthest that we've gone. This is, by the way, the International Space Station. Just a couple hundred miles, 250 miles beyond the surface of the Earth. This is how far the moon is. About 1,000 times further than this distance here. It's an order of magnitude, if not several orders of magnitude, more of a voyage. All right, it's a whole different story, and we've never done that. We're talking 30 Earth diameters distance. That is a formidable venture that we haven't even tried, not even started to try, much less accomplished. This is the press conference held by the 3 Apollo astronauts, Apollo 11 astronauts, once they had returned to Earth from their tremendous journey, right? Look at their demeanor. And when you watch this, the whole press conference, not just photographs, the photographs say a whole lot, but when you watch it on film, it's unbelievable. I mean, it's incredible how downcast they are. They are anything but joyful. Anything but joyful. At this stage, Buzz Aldrin is droning on about some technicalities. And look at Neil Armstrong there. They're frozen in thought for quite a few moments. And this is more or less the tenor of the whole thing. It's just amazing. And these are my notes on the whole thing. The mood is downright funereal, the farthest thing from triumphal, joyful, or giddy you can imagine. The men are extremely stiff, clearly very uncomfortable. There's no fluidity to their speech. It's mechanical and consists entirely of sequential monologues, as if they're delivering scripted parts in a play. There's not the slightest convivial banter between them. There's little authentic detail about the voyage in their talk, except for some technical mumbo-jumbo, nor any spontaneous anecdotes recounting unique experiences, as one would expect in an account of a tremendously exciting, wondrous, and mind-bending experience. Practically nothing in what they say is fabulous or enigmatic. It's all humdrum, unexceptional, perfunctory. Very weird and phony overall. And this is what Dennis Semino says. The body language, the facial expressions. These are men that are under duress. These are men that are not happy. These are men that are very, very displeased with the fact that they're on the spot being asked difficult questions. And they're not just being asked difficult questions. They are living a lie, and they know it full well. And not only a lie, but a murderous lie. They saw their companions murdered for this lie, including Gus Grissom. Gus Grissom was very critical of the program. He wasn't going to go along with the baloney. And at one point, he even hung a lemon on the capsule, on the Apollo space capsule, because that's what he thought it was, and he made it clear. So Grissom was an aircraft engineer. He was constantly inspecting the Apollo capsule and finding many things faulty with it. "I have been howling in the wilderness for years," he said. He called the capsule a bucket of bolts and threatened to go public with his complaints after the lemon incident. Gerard Wisniewski says, "Grissom simply refused to participate in the whole hocus-pocus surrounding the myth of the legendary Apollo spacecraft." Grissom received death threats, and on some occasions he was provided with guards and housed in special safe quarters. He told his wife Betty, "If there ever is a serious accident in the space program, it's likely to be me." And how prophetic he was. Because there was an accident, a deadly accident, on the launch pad with the Apollo space capsule. Grissom and his colleagues, White and Chaffee, were stuffed into this pressure cooker. And I mean that literally, because they filled it with pure oxygen under high pressure. And it burned and incinerated them. It simply charred them to death. The capsule had an extremely flammable atmosphere of pure oxygen under abnormally high pressure. 2, an inward opening hatch, impossible to open quickly under pressure, that had been changed that very morning from the normal outward opening hatch, and which was bolted from the outside and lacked explosive bolts. 3, a tangle of electrical wires, switches, and circuits prone to sparking, plus lots of flammable materials. Ralph Renee says, "Any competent engineer should have known the dangers of oxygen at 16.7 or 20.2 psi, and normal atmospheric pressure is 14.7 psi. And by the way, Ralph Renee is uncertain about this because NASA itself doesn't say exactly, but we know it was abnormally high. Keenan and Harvey, two observers, said, "Most U.S. scientists could not believe their ears when they learned the facts. Oxygen at such pressure comes in the category of an oxygen bomb. This instrument here, it's an actual instrument, a calorimeter bomb, is an instrument that utilizes a combustible material, pressurized oxygen, and a spark." That's exactly what the capsule was. That's what they made it. A New York Times editorial said, "Even a high school chemistry student knows better than to play with 100% oxygen." Bill Kaysing and Ralph Renee call it simply murder. The FBI and NASA immediately ransacked Grissom's home and took all his paperwork, including his personal papers and his diary. Why would they have needed to do that if there was nothing fishy going on? And they weren't finished with the killing. This young man, Thomas Barron, was a safety inspector employed by North American Aviation, Apollo's prime contractor. Before the Apollo 1 fire, Barron had written a 55-page report on sloppiness at the pad, demanding that North American Aviation implement checks at the highest level. "Someone had to make known to the public and the government what infractions are taking place," he said. After the fire, Barron testified before a congressional committee on the disarray of the Apollo program, asserting that the U.S. would never make it to the moon. And then he submitted an additional 500-page report. Julian Scheer, a former NASA spokesperson, recalled that, quote, "There was a real fear that the program could be stopped dead in its tracks." 1 week after testifying, Barron, along with his wife and daughter, were struck and killed by a train as his car was inexplicably stuck on a railroad track crossing a Florida road. His report on the inadequacies of the program disappeared. How coincidental. 1 week after testifying, Barron is killed. And more coincidence. The report disappeared. Nothing to see here, all just chance. And that headline says it all. Crash kills Apollo critic Barron. They killed this guy, they killed this man, just like they killed Grissom and his companions. They killed his family. Finally, and almost most bizarrely, the astronauts claimed that they went all the way to the moon and back and essentially didn't see stars. What they say, that the record on this topic is confused, it's contradictory, it's inconsistent, okay? But broadly speaking, they claim that they didn't see any stars on a space voyage. Now, many Apollo critics look at photographs like this, from the surface of the moon, and they see a completely black sky with no stars, and they say, well, there should have been stars here. Okay, that's actually incorrect, because in these photographs, this is in daytime. They're on the surface of the moon, but they're under the sun. They're in daylight. They're using daytime exposures on their cameras, and that means very little light into the cameras. And under those circumstances, there is not enough light to make out the relatively dim stars. That's true. Okay, but that doesn't explain why they couldn't have seen stars with their naked eye. Forget the camera for now. Okay, all they had to do to see the stars was raise their visor, which acted as large sunglasses, keeping light out, like this guy did. Here we are this guy's supposed to be on the moon, and he raised his visor, and they did that a number of times. Okay, and then look away from the sun, preferably get in the shade of the lunar module or a boulder, and you would see the stars. Wernher von Braun, again much more realistic than Apollo, recognized this, and that's why in his book he has illustrations with the stars. And what he does here is he has the sun blocked by the top of this spaceship here, and the Earth is a new Earth, kind of like a new moon. You only see the shadow, so there's no bright Earth in the sky either. Under those circumstances, he not only shows stars, he shows the Milky Way. All right, that's what you would see on the moon with your naked eye. In fact, on Earth, with our light scattering atmosphere, which blocks, our view of the stars in general, you can see Venus in the daylight, if you know exactly where to look. So imagine if we had no atmosphere at all, we would certainly see at least the brightest stars and planets. Now, the astronauts were asked this question specifically: did you see the stars? Okay, they look all confused and hem and haw, and this is what they said. When you looked up at the sky, could you actually see the stars? Armstrong said, we were never able to see stars from the lunar surface. And then Collins said, I don't remember seeing any. And Dennis Semino says, no matter what NASA wants to say about the contrast levels and the optics, you'd see stars. Let's examine this statement by Collins in particular. Okay, Collins, he never was on the surface of the moon. Only these two were on the surface of the moon. He was in the command module orbiting the moon all the time. And he was going around and around the moon many times, because the orbit was something like 90 minutes or something. And they were there for well over 24 hours, I believe. Anyway, so he went around and around the moon, and on each of those orbits, he was on the dark side of the moon. That's why they call it the dark side of the moon, the side of the moon away from the Earth and away from the sun, all right? On the dark side of the moon, he would have seen nothing but stars in the sky, all right? When he looked at the moon, it would have been black, but when he looks away from the moon, the sky would have been fantastically full of stars, and it would have been just memorable, to say the least. He would not have forgotten that experience, to say the least. And here he is saying, I don't remember seeing any. It's absurd. It's a lie. It's a blatant lie. Now consider the Hubble Space Telescope. Okay, here it is, photographing the sky, stars, and celestial objects in daylight on the day side of the Earth. And why can it do that? How can it do that? It can do that because it's above the atmosphere. All right, so it's seeing a black sky just like the astronauts on the moon. With the space telescope, is that they use long exposure photography. As a matter of fact, the Hubble Space Telescope takes exposures not just in minutes, but hours and days at a time. And it goes around and around the Earth, like 90-minute, that's about the standard, something like that, on that order, 90-minute orbits, and half the time it's in the day, in the dark, on the dark side of the Earth, the night side, and half the time it's on the day side. But it doesn't shut down when it gets on the day side. It keeps on photographing. All it has to do is avoid pointing toward the sun. In fact, photography of the stars is not a problem during the day where there is no atmosphere to scatter the unidirectional light rays from the sun, as long as one uses long exposure, in other words, night settings. That's all you have to do. The astronauts would have been able to do that on the moon as well, okay, if they had taken one of their cameras and put it on a tripod, if they had taken a tripod, which they would have if they were serious, or just place it on a rock or something, and use long exposure settings instead of the day settings that we saw earlier, okay, where they took normal photographs. they could have taken long exposure photographs. And this is what they would have been able to photograph. A pristine, tremendous view of the night sky from the moon without any atmosphere to interfere with the view. They would have taken fantastic photographs. But they couldn't do that because they couldn't fake the sky. They could fake the lunar terrain because we don't know what the lunar terrain looks like. We haven't walked on the moon, but we do know what the night sky looks like. Amateur astronomers as well as professional astronomers, we know quite well what the sky looks like. For instance, in this photograph here, I recognized the constellations. This is Ophiuchus here, this is Scorpius here, and this is Libra here. Okay, and the individual stars, some of them I know, like Antares. These two very bright things are planets. This is probably Jupiter. I'm not sure which planets these are, but the point here is that we can determine where all the stars are and all the planets are or should be, because astronomers can do that. And so you wouldn't be able to fake a night sky. So what did they do? NASA, since they weren't on the moon, okay, they wouldn't have been able to get it right. They decided no stars. That was the party line. NASA took 3 lunar rovers all the way to the moon, but not one small photographic telescope with which to record the sky from the moon. Astronomers dream about an atmosphere-free moon observatory. The Apollo astronauts, on the other hand, display complete indifference to the night sky. They do nothing but collect rocks. Astronomical observation would have been a high priority in a real scientific mission. To conclude, I have shown you an abundance of evidence, a veritable torrent of evidence, that demonstrates conclusively Apollo was a lie, that we have not gone to the moon. We did not go to the moon with Apollo. It was all just a show. The U.S. government's moon landing program has been called, quote, the crowning achievement of humankind, the greatest boast of the species, the event in human history most associated with pride in our own accomplishments, unquote. That was from one of the videos. It did not happen, period. The plain fact, proven copiously and beyond doubt in this study, is that it was an extremely elaborate hoax, as I believe Dennis Semino said early on. A stupendous lie, a lie on a scale unprecedented in the history of the world. The moon is undoubtedly a fantastic place, probably a very beautiful place in its own way. But it is not a friendly place to visit. It's more like this asteroid Vesta, a dead world fully exposed to radiation and micrometeorites, and not a friendly place to visit. Not like this depiction, which for all the world looks like, you know, people driving around and hiking around in a national park here on Earth. That is phony baloney. NASA's moon is bland, featureless, washed out, insipid, innocuous, sterilized, sanitized, neutered, Disneyfied. In short, a fictitious cartoon version of the real moon. Nothing but a platform for American propaganda. This is what they show us. A smiley face malarkey moon. A vehicle for American propaganda. Nothing more, nothing less.